Hi there, and welcome to an extra edition of Alaska's Political Pipeline. I'm political reporter Will Courtney. Today we're going to be talking to two state lawmakers. That's Speaker of the House, Representative Bryce Edgmon, and Representative Cathy Tilton out of Wasilla. We're going to be talking today a little bit about where things currently stand with the Alaska LNG pipeline. Obviously a big, long-awaited decades in the process of creating this pipeline. And the latest from that we learned from the Legislative Budget and Audit Committee. Now both of these lawmakers are part of that committee. They got the chance to hear from Alaska LNG, Glenfarne, about where the pipeline currently sits. And what we learned from this meeting is that there may need to be certain policies that need to be implemented in order for the pipeline to continue to move forward. However, at the same time, what lawmakers are saying, including these two that we'll speak to today, is that they're worried about the future of where this pipeline currently sits and how much information they currently have to make these policy decisions. So we have full extended coverage on what those policy positions are, but you also get to hear some of it in these conversations today. Let's take a listen. Well, Speaker Edgmon, I really appreciate your time today. We're going to be talking a little bit about that Legislative Budget and Audit Committee. We spoke about, or you got the chance to speak to key stakeholders, the LNG Glenfarne president being one of them. You said in the meeting itself that one of your big takeaways was that next session is going to be dominated by legislation related to this LNG project. Can you tell me a little bit about that takeaway and then what else you're taking away from this meeting?
Yeah, my question was for the purposes of trying to get a better sense of what to expect next session, and also to to certainly express that the legislature needs to have an understanding, preferably before we go down to Juneau and the start of the session, what to expect, and if there's any sort of lead time that we might be granted, that would give us an opportunity to begin to formulate the steps involved in getting what clearly would be a major piece of legislation through the process.
And then tell me a little bit about that lead time. When you say lead time, what do you kind of mean?
Well, first off, the legislature, by and large, is fairly new in terms of its institutional knowledge. Over 2/3 of the legislature, going back to last session, has 4 years or less of experience. Many of the members have not been through a major bill of this nature, have not been through a tax discussion, certainly have not been through the intricacies involved with oil and gas and all the interrelated pieces that go into crafting a bill like this. And if the project, as exciting as the progress has been to date, is at the step where it needs a legislature to move, expeditiously in terms of fiscal stability and having, getting a bill through both the House and the Senate and getting it to the governor's desk and getting all those moving pieces engaged. The earlier we know that, the better.
And I guess when it comes to that information that you need, what are you think the key things that going into January or even earlier than January, do you think you need to know to be well equipped to take on this issue?
Well, first off, we need to know if it's needed, number one. Number two, are there any details at a admittedly sort of sensitive phase of the entire project where there's a lot of proprietary discussions taking place out of view, and appropriately so? But what can be shared with legislative leadership in terms of putting strategies together to sort of move this legislation along, knowing that ordinarily a bill of this nature could take 2 sessions and not 1. But if in fact the LNG project is at a stage where things need to move pretty quickly, if you will, in legislative speak, any advance time, any sort of extra opportunity to work on this issue before we get to Juneau would be a great help.
And you mentioned extra time to work on this issue. That makes me think of what Representative Josephson said when he mentioned the idea of a special session. And he said, unless there's a special session, the chances that there's going to be legislation in place before FID is pretty unlikely. There's a few questions I have on that, but I guess first and foremost, do you expect a special session on this topic?
I'm not aware of any attempts to have a special session, and Representative Josephson is accurate. This is a heavy lift. ordinarily with a 2-year cycle in front of us. We're now in the second year of the 34th Alaska legislature. I go back to my original comment about any and all lead time is extremely valuable at this juncture. And if everything that we're being told in the media, in terms of final investment decision, sort of stage gating and things like that, it would seem just intuitively, and from the information that we were provided the other day at the Legislative Budget and Audit meeting, that the legislature needs to act quickly. And that's what I was trying to tease out of the conversation with Glenfarne, and certainly with the legislature's consultant who spoke before him.
Realistically, how quickly do you think the legislature can move on something like this while also making sure that the legislation that does get pushed is comprehensive to the issue and also not lacking any oversight?
Well, let me start by saying that the Alaska Gas Line project, if it does come to fruition all these years later, and I think it's fair to surmise that we're as close as we've ever been, maybe as close as we'll ever get. But if we're that, close to getting the project off the ground and getting phase one developed, and the legislature needs to pivot quickly and to sort of engage in a bill that normally would take a lot more time than what's being asked of us next session. I think, given the transformational nature of the AK LNG project on so many levels in Alaska, that we have to give that serious consideration.
But I guess and it's hard to ask you to estimate how long this will take, because we'll see what happens come this revealed information and additional potentially surprises and whatnot. But are you think this is something that's going to take a month, or it's going to take the entire session?
Well, if it follows the course of years past, it would easily take the entire session, if not more. But again, I go back to the legislature wanting to be a willing partner, but that the legislature and its leadership needs to be informed along the way, at least at a high level in terms of what's coming down the gate.
And then for FID, do you have any expectation on when FID should be anticipated? I mean, Representative Josephson's comments kind of estimate that it'll be a little bit around the middle of December. Is that like your expectation?
I'm not sure what to expect. And I think in fairness, to a project of this magnitude, and looking back all those years ago, what was involved in the Trans-Alaska pipeline, all the details, the arrangements with financiers, certainly the agreements, just the top to bottom involved. I think it's too early to know. And my takeaway from the meeting is that it's clearly a moving target, although there is momentum. There's unquestionably momentum involved.
What needs to happen? Oh, yeah. What needs to happen before January in your view? Are we expecting another legislative budget and audit committee meeting? Are we expecting some more information delivered to the committee? Like what are we maybe expecting?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know how to answer that. If the progress is happening on the project as is being conveyed to us, and everything seems right around the corner in terms of this final investment decision, presumably, and I think ideally, there would be more meetings in December to, again, sort of cue things up for the upcoming legislative session. But at this point, I don't know of anything of that nature, that would lead us to having another meeting.
Yeah. And then I think the key takeaway I had was from one of GaffneyCline's slides. That's the legislative action likely to be taken prior to FID. I think that's one of those key issues, and it has a whole laundry list of different what they say is legislative action that should be taken prior to FID. And there's a ton of things on there. Fiscal stability is one thing we've noticed. Oil and gas production tax royalty, equity investment in the LNG project. But I looked at the property taxes. And they say specifically Alaska's property tax is one of the biggest potential burdens on project economics. Why is that one of the biggest burdens?
Right, because you're bringing stakeholders into the into the picture who have a vested interest in what's happening at the property tax level. And for sure, they want to know what the impact is going to be on their local communities, their local taxing jurisdictions, and so forth. And that's another reason that if there's something out there, if there is a bill being drafted by the administration or whatever might be in the works, let's start having that discussion now as opposed to later.
And I mean, we're looking at billions as well when it comes to that fiscal stability item as well, that taking potentially allowing investors tax relief if tax adjustments are changed. This would have to be, depending on what agreement is really assigned to. Is that something that you think the legislature would be interested in taking in to consideration, fiscal stability?
Oh, I think we'd definitely be willing to take a look at it, but the devil clearly is in the details, and it's really hard to respond to any sort of specific questions without having the legislation in front of us. And again, without having the input from the state's agencies, Department of Natural Resources, Department of Revenue, certainly the governor's office. The legislature would bring on its own consultants to look at things independently, stakeholders, investors in and out of the state potentially. Just a tremendous amount of moving parts. And I go back to the meeting that was held in Anchorage last week, and the legislature, the members of the committee, I think, expressed pretty clearly that if all of this is imminent and it's on a very short timeline coming up next session, let's get going on it.
And that's my next questions. I think Senator Giesel asked during the meeting, is there actually a bill or any sort of plan to have a bill on this form of legislation? The answer was no then. Has anything changed since, to your understanding?
No. And Senator Giesel's question, of course, was to the legislature's consultant. He was not aware of any bill in the offing. He was not doing any work on a bill of any nature. So my presumption at this point is that there probably isn't a bill in the making unless it's at the administration's level, and we have not heard anything to confirm or to not confirm that at this point.
And I guess to go back to what we were talking about earlier in this conversation, with the speed that, at least AK LNG is saying that things may need to be moving at, is the legislature moving at the speed that maybe AK LNG wants them to move at?
Right. That is the question du jour. Are we or are we not? And is there more we could be doing? And that's one of the reasons that I asked what I thought were very pointed questions during this hearing last week in Anchorage. Are we being a good partner in terms of doing our part in moving all this forward? And at this point, I couldn't give you a definitive answer because, along with other legislative leaders, I don't think we know where things really stand with a project that apparently is making good progress.
And I think just one last question for you, and this is what was in the back of my head when I was watching the meeting proper. It's probably in the back of your head too. I kind of just keep going back to what we saw over the summer with all these vetoes, and we had the veto override. The governor specifically said the reason for the BSA veto was because of decreasing oil revenues. We are operating on a budget that just gets tighter and tighter and tighter every year. This project does have the potential, and I believe they said $400 billion by the end of its lifetime. I mean, that's transformational revenue for the state, but it does come at some pretty high risks for the state to get it launched. I guess my question is, without guaranteed federal assistance, are we even in a state to be having some of these conversations right now?
I mean, you're asking all the same questions that I think we in the legislature are asking, and they're all very pertinent questions. And the conversations behind the scenes, I'm sure, are being held, but not with the leadership in the legislature or with the legislature as a whole, to the extent that I think they should be happening. And I hope they'll be happening soon because I'm pretty excited about the prospect of Gasline Alaska. It would change everything in our state, and if we're as close as we think we are, what we're being told we are, then let's position the legislature as best we can to be a willing partner in all of this.
Yeah. And I guess maybe just a few more questions off of that, if you have just a little bit more time.
Mhm.
I guess, what does it mean to have, I'm just a reporter, and while I like to think I have sources, You are the Speaker of the House. You're a lawmaker. You have the potential to sequester this information in a way that I can't. So what does it mean to maybe have someone like me ask questions that you're asking yourself and you can't answer?
Well, it means that it's going to take significant time to get a related piece of legislation through the legislature, right? Because we need to be able to analyze, the contents of the bill. We need to hire third-party consultants. We need to get the involvement of certainly, the executive branch and just a whole host of things involved. And I would, I'll go back to the point that we need to get the legislature itself educated on this issue. It's a very complicated matter, and the bill would be about as complex as you could put before the legislature and the body as a whole. All 60 members, 40 in the House, 20 in the House. Pardon me, 40 in the House and 20 in the Senate. A great many of whom have never, considered a bill of this nature or really sat down and had the opportunity in years past, as myself and other veteran legislators have had to, to have some groundedness in the topic and to have institutional knowledge and, is going to be, before the legislature.
And then my last question, I promise. You kind of hit on why you're optimistic for this project for the state. Again, that transformational revenue. On the other hand, we've talked a lot about what we don't know about this project. What makes you pessimistic right now that this project, it was just going to be delayed further?
Well, I think we in Alaska have the right to be skeptical, if not downright pessimistic, because this project has been on the tip of our tongues virtually since the first, ounce of oil flowed through the pipeline back in 1977. And there have been so many stops and starts, so many moments of optimism, and then only for things to sort of collapse, and then we start all over again. And I think rightfully so. We should be skeptical until proven otherwise. And when I've talked with the developers of the project, certainly with the governor and others, I say we have earned the right to be skeptical until sort of demonstrated otherwise. But it's pretty clear at this point, from a macro viewpoint, that there is agreements in place. There are more people wanting to buy the natural gas. There's progress being made by Glenfarne on a number of levels. But does that all get us to the point where we actually have the money to build the project, get the investors lined up? I think that's a big unknown right now. And until somebody can tell me personally that that's all in place, I'm going to choose to be skeptical.
And that was Representative Bryce Edgmon from the majority, also, again, the Speaker of the House. He's not affiliated out of Dillingham. Let's move over to Representative Cathy Tilton out of Wasilla, part of the minority party and a Republican. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be talking about that LBA meeting on LNG. Obviously, a lot discussed, specifically on what the legislature needs to do for the future of LNG. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your takeaways from that meeting?
Well, I think the takeaway from the meeting was that there is a good reason to be cautiously optimistic about the outcomes of the gas line. There was some new materials I think that people were kind of trying to digest. There's a lot to understand on the financing portion of the contracts and what have you, and for legislators, and especially a lot of us who've been on finance, we're numbers people, so we want to have those numbers in front of us. So and we might not have got all that information right in front of us at that meeting, but I do still think that there is a lot of reason to be optimistic about getting to FID, and this project would be a huge boon for Alaska.
Right, and that's kind of the overwhelming narrative I've been hearing, that more just still needs to be learned about this project. When it comes to legislation, there was a lot mentioned specifically on fiscal stability and property taxes. I'm curious what you think some legislation, in your view, needs to be applied with the next legislative session, or do we still just need more information before we even start having those conversations?
I think that there needs to be more information. My understanding is that there needs to be a meeting with some of the mayors of the the areas that are affected, so that they can come together and have those conversations. I just don't think we have enough information yet to really put forth legislation at this point.
Yeah. So I guess with that kind of in mind, what are the next steps that the legislature needs to take to properly get this moving? Because it seems like, on one hand, this is very immediate. It needs to happen yesterday almost to make sure that the pipeline is adequately, not only are there the laws to make sure that everyone's protected in this process, but that everything can be moving swiftly and fast and whatever you kind of want to say. So what does the legislature need to do to make sure that they're, following the speed that, the pipeline seems to be rapidly moving at right now?
I think the legislature needs to keep open communications with all the parties involved and with the governor as well, to know what it is that we need to put forward so that we can do that quickly. I think good communications is going to be a key to this, and I think that's we really need to focus on continuing the conversation, keeping those communication lines open, and being prepared so that we are prepared to put forth legislation when that point comes.
Yeah. And when do you think that point is? I just got off the phone with Speaker Edgmon not too long ago. He said it could take the entire legislative session. Is that kind of the expectation you're working with?
It sounds to me like, and I know Speaker Edgmon asked at the LBNA meeting if this was going to be kind of the highlight of the session, and it sounds like it will be the highlight of the session. So it could take the whole session. I think when we get to FID, which it sounds like maybe in early January, that will be maybe a turning point there, where we'll have more information and be able to have those conversations throughout the session.
Yeah. And then one last kind of question. Representative Josephson in the meeting also said, unless there's a special session, this month, plans for laying out this pipeline and making sure that all these property taxes and fiscal stability statements are ready are unlikely before FID. So what's your understanding? Speaking to Speaker Edgmon, that's a tongue twister. He said that there aren't any expectations for a special session. Do you have any expectations for a special session, or would you support one?
I feel like it's unlikely that there would be a special session as we are so close to getting ready to go into session. Right. I think that we could probably do the work that needs to be done through the committee processes, which could happen beforehand. You just can't have any kind of votes on it, but you can have the meetings as we've been doing. There's LBNA has been focusing on this. We have resources. We have the gas line caucus. I think there's many, in my opinion, every legislator should be being involved in this so that we can make the decisions that we need to make in a timely manner.
And thank you for listening to this extra edition of Alaska's Political Pipeline. Before we close out our show today, I want to say a few things that I'm thankful for looking into this Thanksgiving holiday. I really want to say a big thank you and say I'm thankful for my family. I got the chance to move to Alaska from Indiana about 6 or 7 months ago now, and it's a long way from home, and for my family to be some of the first listeners to this podcast every single Monday, and even the extra editions too, it means a lot, and I get to hear about their feedback, both good and bad, every single week, and I'm really just thankful for my family. I also want to say I'm thankful for my family here at Alaska's News Source as well, who gave me the opportunity to bring back this podcast and to continue it however I think is best to continue it, and that's a lot of trust they place on me, and it's not something I take lightly. And finally, thank you for listening. It's been a process to bring this podcast back, but I wouldn't do it if it wasn't for the feedback that I get every single week. I'm incredibly grateful for it, and I'm incredibly thankful for you. And thank you again for listening to this edition of Alaska's Political Pipeline. If you like what you listen to, consider rating our podcast and giving us a follow. We'll be back next Monday, but in the meantime, as always, please take care.